Welcome to session 4, titled The Role of Industrial and Trade Policies in Shaping Women-Owned Business Enterprises. My name is Phumzile Ncube, and I'm from the South African Research Chair in Industrial Development at the University of Johannesburg. We have 4 very interesting presentations today, cutting across various themes from trade and industrial policies to understanding the impact of various trade regimes such as the WTO and also the fairly newly enacted AFCFTA. I think that the session is not only timely, but also relevant from an inclusivity perspective, as we know that South Africa's inequalities are quite stark when we use a gender lens. So discussions around inclusion, specifically as part of the theme, could not be more important. Presenters, just a quick note, I will give you 15 minutes to present. I will notify you when you have 5 minutes and when you have 1 minute. Our first presentation is from Liya Cherian. Please take it away.
My name is Liya Cherian. I am from SEDA, and I am responsible for export development and the She Trades program, which is a flagship program of the International Trade Center that reports to the World Trade Organization. So when we were running this program, the She Trades program, we found that there's a lot of problems that our women are facing. And moreover, especially now that we've got the AFTA agreement that is coming into place, and I was one of the people that actually was consulted regarding the women protocol, it actually got me thinking, how effective are export trade policies when it comes to women in trade, especially women in export? And that is how this research topic came about. So with regards to the known, the policy goals. So we know that the trade policies, they are there to enhance export competitiveness. And we want to make sure that they create a favorable environment, ensuring that our women entrepreneurs are able to trade internationally. And then it talks, the next known is that there are challenges that women entrepreneurs face when it comes to exporting. And that is mainly limited access to finance, information, and also the networking. And there's also the social and cultural barriers that women are facing. Then the consequences is that these challenges can hinder growth and also the profitability, and it also creates a great disparity when it comes to gender equality. So as much as we know the knowns in the argument, it suggests that these trade policies, it has to be in place so that there's a boost in export competitiveness. And inadvertently, it actually neglects to check the specific needs and the challenges that women entrepreneurs are experiencing. And that is where the studies come in. And then when it comes to the unknown, we know that limited studies on the impact of export trade policies. How do export trade policies influence women entrepreneurs? Are policymakers taking into consideration women when they are drafting these policies and developing these policies? Then the gender disparities. We see that women-owned firms export far less than male-owned firms. And it makes it even worse that in South Africa, we don't have any data regarding women exporters. And there's an international trade with regards to the cultural and also the social. And many people on the outside, outside South Africa, when they want to trade with women, they're very reluctant because they've got a biasness when it comes to women entrepreneurs. So the policy part of it is where they need to evaluate and see the effectiveness of these trade policies and to see what sort of measures can be taken into place to ensure that our women entrepreneurs are developed, our women entrepreneurs are able to contribute to the economy. We create jobs, just as we were told there in the opening of this TIPS forum. So this research question is, how do export trade policies influence the internationalization of women-owned businesses? So when it comes to a theoretical framework, we looked at the institutional theory, and we know that the institutional theory talks about the laws, the practices, the norms and customs, and that shape social behavior and organizational practices. And when you put that into context of women in export, we saw that how do these various formal and informal institutions influence women's participation in trade? And does it have impact? Are there any barriers created through those institutional practices? And then we've got the normative influence, where many cultures, social norm dictates primary responsibility of women in, where their stand is to be at home. And we said during COVID time, many women had to close down their businesses because as the breadwinner, the male counterpart is the one that is has to be the one that is running the business or has to focus on his work, while the woman has to be at home. And I'm sure many of the women here would remember all the countless working from homes and also the schooling that you had to do. And there was no time to focus on a business. So those are the kind of normative cultural expectations that women have to undergo when it comes to business. So imagine how much more difficult it is when it comes to women in export. And then we've got the understanding of the normative institutional, which enables policymakers to develop trade policies that resolve the barriers and create opportunities for women in trade. So this is to provide valuable insights and also practical recommendations on what are the solutions that we can come up with regards to women in export. And then we've got the feminist theory. So with the liberal feminist theory, we said men and women are equal. We don't want to be one above the other. We just want to have the same opportunities that men are having. And the importance of having equal access to resources, training, and market opportunities. And this will actually dismantle the structural barriers preventing women from exporting. Then we've got the intersectional feminism, where women from disadvantaged areas face challenges due to intersectional factors such as race, socioeconomic statuses, and geographical locations. And we see that, especially with my kind of work, where many of the women in Gauteng and Western Cape are far more advanced with regards to women in export than those from the rural areas like the Northern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape. So that also needs to be taken into consideration when policies are developed. And then we've got the feminist trade policies, which are designed to promote gender equality and foster inclusive, equitable trade environment. So example, gender-sensitive trade agreements. There's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration when we are developing a trade agreement where you need to consider women. For example, women who are trading at the borders, they do not even have the basic toilet facilities. And those are things that you need to take into consideration when you are developing a trade policy and you are fostering an environment of women in trade. And that is also one of the barriers that prevent women from getting into this, because it's just too many difficult hurdles that they need to jump over when it comes to trade. Then we talked about the policy enablers and barriers. So we said that feminist trade policies, they prioritize gender equality and institutional reforms promoting women participation. And then the barriers, discrimination based on gender and other characteristics and institutional biases, for example, in funding. Women are seen as low risk takers. And because of that, many of times they're not given loans. And a catch-22 situation, if you're not given loans, how are you going to attract investors into your business? So this is the area that needs to be considered. Then the internationalization, what are the benefits of it? Increased profits and profitability, access to global value chains and new markets, improved competitiveness and innovation, and enhanced self-confidence and leadership skills. I mean, a woman who is able to export her products even just across the border to Botswana or Swaziland or Lesotho, imagine the kind of self-confidence that she has. And as much as I hate to be partial, a woman who is successful on that right, imagine the community, the sense of community that she builds within where she stays also. So these are the advantages and that we need to take into focus when we are drafting trade policies. So this study was a qualitative study, and we focused on South Africa's potential for internationalizing of SMEs, especially women. And we I interviewed 19 South African women entrepreneurs in international business, and the sample characteristics participants were selected from databases like the South African She Trades Hub and SEDA, and focusing on women-owned businesses engaging in international trade. And we looked at the size, the degree of globalization, and at least 3 years of export experience. And as you will see, many of them are in the food industry. It just so happened that many of the women that we did select are exporting, and they are in the food industry. And the data collection was a semi-structured interviews, and then data analysis. We formed themes based on the interviews that was conducted. So the participants, you can see they vary in their turnover and the products and the areas that they are exporting to. And it's just some of the comments where they talk about policies that prohibits them to internationalize. And then just to get into one of the client who talks about saying that there's no voice in the industry for the flatbread industry. So from this, the findings is that the themes that came out is that the reason why women want to internationalize is they want to grow and expand their business. They want to have market entry, and they have aspirations for global expansion. And then the question of how do export trade policies enable women entrepreneurs to internationalize? It's mainly through the provision of government support and programs. And then what are the policy that prevents them from internationalizing? It was the challenges of entering the global market, the delayed export activities, lack of funding was a major factor, and the not leveraging on the policy benefits, meaning many women did not know what export trade policies are, and the exclusion of women due to lack of women-specific policies. And then how do women entrepreneurs navigate through this? Many of them, they rely on international best practices, and they try to network as much as possible. And you can see now forming women's association has become quite a trend among women business owners. So how do women entrepreneurs influence the change in export trade policy? We want to have a gender-inclusive trade targets and advocacy, addressing policy and regulatory challenges in business, and collaborative knowledge and exchange. And one of the things that came out from this here is that the underlying behavior and actions women adopt to handle hurdles, example, balancing business with societal expectations, and these behaviors help ID effective strategies that women use to navigate and reconcile the tensions. Then we've got the paradoxical tension. These are the positive tensions where women overcome the challenges, and that's why we've got women exporters. And the negative tensions are those that are actually preventing our women from actually exporting. And then we've got the managing the tensions, where you've got to develop unique strategies to manage and navigate the tensions they encounter. They act as catalysts to policy change, advocating for inclusive and supportive trade policies, and engage with policymakers. That was a big request that came, and challenge part of it was finding ways to overcome these limitations, such as forming alliances, accessing alternative funding, and utilizing digital platforms. So our contribution to this study was that the gender neutral policy is that we want to have opportunities for export related resources and capacity building programs. We want women to be able to compete fairly and no gender biasness. And the flexible framework is that being flexible to support women based on the landscape of women entrepreneurship that is existing. And then also the women-owned enterprises vary in size, location, and industry. So policy has to be adaptable to address unique needs of different women-owned businesses. And then gender specific is that policymakers can create targeted interventions and support women-owned enterprises directly and aim to ID unique challenges and barriers like capital for businesses and also trade finance. Then lastly, the policy recommendation, gather gender inclusive data. We need to know how many women are exporting, and that actually gives us a target on what we need to work on. Secondly, simplify regulations. When you've got a lot of bureaucracy, it prevents women from actually even considering exporting. Next, educate stakeholders. The fact that we are sitting together, this is one way of educating stakeholders on the kind of barriers and the problems that women are facing when it comes to exporting. And lastly, inclusivity and partnership. Collaboration efforts can enhance market access and share best practices, create supportive ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Went right on time. Our next presentation is by Nicola Wills. She's presenting a paper that she's written with her colleagues. Nicola, do you mind sharing your screen?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nicola Wills. I am an economist at DNA Economics. So this research was done together with my colleagues, Dr. Matthew Stern, Vuiswe, and Godfrey. I'm not sure if they are here today, but they were very important in this piece of work. So the title of the study was Identifying, Assessing, and Monitoring the Impact of Trade Barriers on Women-Owned Businesses in Africa. So I'll introduce you to the project, I'll support collaborators, and then kind of the process that we went through, engaging with the women through surveys, through interviews, and then kind of what we learned from the study. So just to introduce, firstly, the study, so it was conducted on the barriers confronting women traders in Africa, implemented by us, DNA Economics, and then African Women in Business, and supported by the Prosper Africa initiative, and it's a high level presidential level national security initiative in kind of strengthening the strategic partnership between the US and Africa. So looking then at the Africa Free Trade Area, as you might know, it aims to create a single market for goods and services across Africa. But at the same time, there is an impact of deeper regional integration on marginalized groups, including women-owned businesses. But it's uncertain as to what extent this kind of effect is. And so we know that, women do contribute significantly in terms of entrepreneurship, employment, poverty alleviation, as well as there's a lot of literature in terms of limited access to finance, large information asymmetries, especially when you're talking about, just accessing the knowledge that there are trade areas, social discrimination, inadequate support from the government, and disproportionately large challenges in getting their goods to and across the borders, which hinders their abilities to start a business. But then when you want to grow your business and start, exporting and going across borders, becomes incredibly difficult. And so we wanted to look at, exploring these challenges, and then, are some of the women taking advantage or know of the Africa Free Trade Area, and how could that kind of be leveraged to support women? So in terms of how we engaged with women, with the traders, so the Africa Women in Business, they had a database they have a lot of kind of members through their organization across multiple different countries. And so that was extremely valuable. We were then able to distribute a survey, organize focus group discussions, and then use that information to interview kind of more one-on-one and do some case studies. So with that, the aim was to identify, collect data on, and then assess existing barriers to interregional trade. So in terms of our methods, multi-method with quantitative and qualitative data. So with the survey, we were able to get 359 responses from women-owned businesses across 18 countries. Most of these were smaller enterprises, and the survey was available in English, French, and Portuguese to do this. The focus group discussions then happened in 11 different countries to kind of validate and enrich the results from the survey. Sorry, not invalidate, validate, which they did indeed. And something that was really amazing to see was that participants, specifically when we engaged with them in the case, the focus groups, were really, really eager to share their experiences, learn from one another, and really wanted to network and just wanted information and support and to advocate for change and support doing that. So in terms of what our findings were, the main and the most significant challenges for women, and these were said, so we had a kind of a scale from 1 to 5, and over 60% or more saw this as a significant challenge, was a lack of government support programs, transportation and shipping costs, obtaining trade finance or trade insurance, and then exchange rate volatility. So this is moving the goods between the countries. Then at the actual point of border, some of the prevalent obstacles were bribery and corruption, cumbersome customs processes and wait times, tariffs, import duties, and then delays, closures, and as I said, wait times. It was also extremely concerning that approximately 30% of the respondents reported that they have experienced an act or threat of violence at the border, and almost a quarter were willing to acknowledge some sort of sexual harassment. And as we would know, usually this kind of thing is underreported, so we would expect it to be more. Some people had actually gone and tried to report, but they'd had challenges with that, and it just kind of came to nothing. Then in terms of in the home country, women felt that, accessing credit or business loan was really difficult, as well as within country trying to get a permit or visa to not even just operate in other countries, but also go to other countries to, see, okay, what's the market like, that sort of thing, to get that visa, and then also to get a work permit to actually go over there. Gender discrimination was also reported as a challenge for 46% of the respondents. But it was quite interesting in that we were then able to segment the data from the surveys into countries. And
Hi,
as
Nicola.
we would expect. Yes?
I'm so sorry. We are having significant challenges here with our internet, so we haven't heard much of your second findings slide. So if you and the colleagues online could bear with us, do you mind just starting this slide that you're on, just starting it again? I'm not sure how much we've missed, if any.
Not much, don't worry. Okay. So I was just saying that the main challenges in the home country was accessing credit or business loan, as well as getting permits and visas. So to go to a country and kind of scope out what the business opportunities are, but then also to then get that work permit. We also found, and this was kind of differed by challenge, but a lot of the challenges were differed by country, which we would expect. Africa is not a homogenous kind of unit. Each country has its own context and difficulties. Although gender discrimination was still quite a challenge, and 46% of the respondents found that. We then also wanted to just look at awareness of various trade agreements. And it was relatively good, especially the East African Community, CMAC, COMESA, SADC. But so people knew about it, but then the use of the preferences was generally quite low. Then we looked specifically at the Africa Free Trade Area. Only half of the respondents were aware that their country is a participant. And companies and respondents reported, there was a lot of challenges in finding. They knew it existed, but finding the documentation, information on rules of origin, that sort of stuff, was just very cumbersome and difficult. So once we went from the surveys, we moved into these focus groups, and as I said, they validated our findings and confirmed that women traders are affected by a wide variety of non-tariff barriers, as well as severe structural, social, and cultural challenges, which hinders their ability to participate in trade. And so this then highlighted the need for sort of a monitoring and advocacy work in this area. And so the 6 then lessons that we were kind of key from the focus group, which then we could take as a whole to create this monitoring mechanism. So we found that, people want business networks and associations, information, training, financing, government support, again, interests and experiences across country and within country do differ. And then the prevalence of abuse and harassment. And so then we set about, okay, we want to develop a monitoring and reporting tool, knowing that, yes, the AFCFTA will alleviate challenges, but it also may introduce additional challenges, as I said, specifically for women-owned businesses. And so we developed an Excel-based monitoring tool and measurement index. And what it does is it tracks the progress of the AFCFTA in alleviating priority trade barriers. Also evaluates, then you evaluate the AFCFTA's impact on regional trade, and just general reporting on challenges faced by women-owned businesses. And it's kind of aimed at this monitoring tool, which is available from Africa Women in Business. It can be used by policymakers just to identify, okay, what's happening, what are the trends in the challenges. Can also be then used by women as an advocacy tool, as evidence to support policy change, as well as the Africa Free Trade Area Secretariat and other regional economic communities, again, to just help identify areas that need more effort in a bid to reduce trade barriers. Then going forward, the insights from the study kind of highlighted the need for well-targeted training, financial support, access to information, and protection for women traders in Africa. And so this monitoring and reporting mechanism would help identify and communicate challenges and track the progress that is made in alleviating the priority barriers. So lessons on how kind of we then, with the focus groups, we also wanted to test, okay, this tool that we've created, is there things we should add, take away? How can we use it? And some kind of findings here came that, the project and specifically the monitoring tool, it needs to include as many African countries as possible. We were obviously only including the ones within the Africa Women in Business country network, as well as being able to include as many women as possible from all different areas. So not just your kind of more densely populated areas, but also your distant and rural. And then also ensuring, okay, you're getting this information from them, but it also needs to be a two-way street where they also communicated as stakeholders, the findings and what are the plans that you're going to take forward, also in different languages so that everyone can understand it and easily accessible. So this would be through digital platforms. Again, we do know that internet is a problem, and so that would be something to note. So then we were also able to come up with recommendations for the business associations, such as Africa Women in Business, but others as well as donors working in this space. So for African business associations, again, it was they need to engage with and communicate with the women traders directly, providing education and guidance for women-owned businesses, but asking them, what do you need, and then providing what they need and what you've communicated with them, as well as other capacity building activities that they voiced to us in both the surveys and focus groups was financial literacy, market access, product development, networking, and trade policy related training. Again, ensuring that the rural areas also included people from rural areas in all different languages, and working together then to collectively advocate and lobby for women trades interests and active participation in the AFCFTA structures. Lastly, looking at donors, again, there was a big call for assisting countries in strengthening domestic licensing and standard regimes, looking at country-specific and regional initiatives. They need to be evidence-based and needs-based. So, getting the data, talking to the people on the ground. And another thing that was very important was addressing some of the deeper structural and societal changes, specifically harassment of these women traders. So women traders, they do policy isn't static, changes, business environment changes. And so in this, donors also need to be flexible and adaptable, and this is where, again, communication is very important, communicating with the business associations and the women, what kind of work, what kind of support do you need at this time? And so engaging, super important to make sure that the support is A, relevant, and B, sustainable. Here, due to the lack of, well, as I said, with the AFCFTA, some women, did know about it, but they didn't, they didn't use it because they couldn't access the information. They didn't know what it implied. And so here, specialized training on the AFCFTA and how women traders can benefit and what it has to offer was extremely important. And that is all from me. Thank you so much.
This one. Okay. My name is I'm not Liya. I'm Thembekile Mlangeni. I work at the Department of Trade and Industry, Trade, Industry and Competition. I'm a trade negotiator. I focused more on World Trade Organization issues. I think my presentation will be a bit different. I want to take you to a level, a multilateral setting, but discussing the issues that we have now. I'm not focused on gender issues, but as I make my presentation, think about gender issues, think about small business, think about labor issues, the social clause, think about all those issues that the narrative these days is we want to see them in the trade policy. And think about whether we want to take those issues, which are mostly domestic regulation, and subject them to a multilateral environment that is a legal environment. So when you make a legal agreement, you commit. And if you don't implement, there are consequences. So think about that as I present. The objective of our paper, I've written this paper with Dr. Bulelwa Mapela, who is a lecturer on local economic development at the University of Johannesburg. The objective of our paper is to determine whether the WTO, which is a rule-making institution, can solve our country-specific challenges. We want to unpack the mandate of the WTO. We want to let you know that there are informal, ongoing discussions on small enterprises, on gender issues at the WTO. Note, I'm not saying there are negotiations. I'm saying there are informal discussions at the WTO on all these issues. Okay, this one. Okay, the methodology, we've used a mixture of qualitative content and archival analysis. As such, on available literature on SMEs, well, at the WTO, they call it SMEs. They don't call it SMMEs, but it's the same thing. We looked at WTO agreements, archival reports, especially of the informal group on SMEs. And finally, we did a synthesis of the two methods. SA was subjectively chosen based on the documented challenges of the SMEs environment. Now, I'll move through the slides very quickly because in the morning, we had a very rich discussion, especially on the definition and the data on small SMEs. And, my question to the presenters, I'm happy that Professor who was presenting in the morning is here, was mostly on the definition of SMEs. According to the OECD, there is a definition. They say it accounts for 99% of all firms and are a significant employment equating to 70% of jobs on average. We have a different number for South Africa, which is much, much lower. We learned in the discussions this morning. And Vuma and Manewick, they say that SMEs always been the stimulants for economic development of South Africa. This assertion is subject to, debate. The major challenge of the environment of SMEs is the various definitions, the classifications that mostly leave potential economic players on the margins. So this morning we learned there's informal, there's formal, and under formal, there's more classifications there. There's informal that is constituted by like 95% of Black people in that. But think about that classification and take it to the WTO. That is only for South Africa. Brazil will have its own. The UK will have its own. China will have its own. But how do we put it together under the WTO in a rule-making institution? Remember I said, once you subject it to a legal framework, you implement. And if you don't implement, there are consequences. The varied definitions of SMEs, the lack of a universal definition of what constitutes a SMEs is a primary challenge, even at the WTO, not just for South Africa, for all countries individually, but collectively for WTO members at the WTO. That's the definition that's been was offered by the National Small Business Act of South Africa in 2003. But this slide is basically saying that definition varies from country to country, depending on the country's status, the performance, the challenges, and more. And again, SMEs or SMEs are mostly defined for the purpose, for an intended purpose. So yes. For instance, the ITC, when they want to offer training, they will define an SMEs based on what they want to offer. So it's always been like that. So given these nuances, it's unclear how a WTO mandate could be shaped to deal with complexities to respond to the specific needs of SMEs. Not just WTO, even in the AFCFTA, we will have the same problem. I'm not talking only about SMEs, but also gender, but also labor clauses, and all those issues that are social. There were strategies for SMEs intervention in South Africa, but emphasis was put on support for education and training. I will not go through the slides. This is all the interventions, some of the interventions that South Africa did, and these were the policies that were proposed over the years for SMEs. What are the results today? Still, we are not where we think we're supposed to be with all the interventions that we've had. There are reasons. We have a highly unequal society, unemployment, poverty, and all those things. We're still mired in challenges such as access to capital, regardless of the preferential policies that we've had. Struggles with compliance shut the doors to possible growth and sustainability. Now, South Africa is not a member of that informal group that is discussing SMEs. So you will hear people saying, no, but there's a very good informal group there at the WTO discussing gender, discussing SMEs. South Africa, why are you not there? Because we will lose out on opportunities. We are not there. That means if SA joins that group, it means now we will have to take all our challenges and take them to the group and determine whether the WTO is meant or whether the WTO is able to respond to the challenges that we are putting on the table. What's the mandate of the WTO? The mandate of the WTO is to negotiate, to implement, and to enforce WTO agreements. Now, of the 166 members of the WTO, 103 are members of this informal group. Why? Because if the WTO has to have new negotiations. SMEs is a new negotiation. Gender is a new negotiations. Members of the WTO have to agree by consensus that we will start to negotiate on these issues. There's no consensus. 103 members have agreed, 66 have not agreed. South Africa is among the 66. We have not agreed. Now, if we agree and the SME issue is a formal issue negotiated at the WTO, what does it mean? It means now the SME, we will have to make commitments. Remember, our SME regulations are domestic rules. These are domestic rules. So we will want to take whatever commitment that we are making and put it at the table at a multilateral level and open up. One of the WTO principles, some of the WTO principles are saying what you offer domestically, you offer to everyone, most favored nation principle. So the 63 members, which South Africa is one of those, are citing concerns. Okay, I have 1 minute and I have a very important slide that I have to show you. We are citing concerns that there's no, okay. So my 1 minute extends. I'm left with like 3 or 4 slides, then I'll be done. So the 63 members are citing that this is a structure with no common understanding of the scope and rationale for such a discussion under the WTO framework. The elements of a proposal that they are putting are not clear. They are not defining what SME is. They are not defining it. And that means if they're not defining it, whatever benefits that will accrue will have to go to developed countries, to developing countries, to least developed countries in the same way. So they're saying we'll give you special and differential treatment. How? They are not saying it. Okay, it's not there. Okay, and intentional SME's definition, I have already spoken on this, that whenever an SME is defined, there is a purpose that is intended to serve. I have not seen a universal definition of SMEs. Okay, so we need caution. We need to have a pragmatic view, a grounded understanding of the legacies of different economies, especially African countries. And MSMEs in Africa is not the same as MSMEs in Germany. So we need to know what we're talking about. So this is the second last slide, and this is the important slide that I wanted to tell you. Under all the challenges of and the work program of the informal group in the WTO, they are saying that, okay, we will start by collecting information exchange. What are they doing now? They want to know, what is it? What are your policies for SMEs? So that by the time we formalize this group, we know exactly what you are doing and you can account. You understand? So the purpose of the trade policy review reports, they're saying, let's collect data and put it in the trade policy reports. The trade policy review reports is something that is ongoing, that is happening, but it never had information on SMEs. But now they're proposing that let's have it there. The purpose of the trade policy report is to contribute to improve adherence to rules, to disciplines and commitments under the multilateral trading system, and where applicable, plurilateral agreements. So MSMEs, if we don't join, but the membership agrees that we negotiate, it's going to be a plurilateral agreement. So this will lead to the smoother functioning of the MTS, greater transparency, understanding of members' trade policies. So as I've said, when we formalize this, we have to adhere to the most favored nation principle of the WTO. We have to adhere to national treatment. What you give to your people here, you have to open up and treat each member of the WTO equally. Whatever you do for your SMEs, you do for everyone. Okay. Then the last point, technical assistance and capacity building. Basically here we are saying that the group is saying, oh, the WTO will offer technical assistance and capacity building. You go through all the WTO rules. There is no rule that says the WTO gives capacity, technical assistance and capacity building to small business. It gives it to government officials. And Tina, as government officials, we must go and train our regulators, our private sector, our small businesses. So the rule is not there, and the WTO will not do anything that is not in the rules. It's a rule-making institution. So in some of the challenges, they work with institutions such as the ITC, where they facilitate. You know, you want finance? Okay, we have this group, we facilitate your finance to the ITC. Why don't we just go straight to the ITC instead of coming to the WTO so that the WTO facilitates? So these are the issues that we need to think about as we, you know, negotiate our policies. So these are my conclusions and recommendations. I will not go into detail. We have a paper that is detailed, but you can look at it. But what is important is that we must know that if we want our policies, our domestic policies, to be included in multilateral, in negotiations, we can discuss our trade policies, but as soon as we say we want to see it in the AFCFTA agreement, we must understand that's a legal agreement, and we must know exactly what do we want and how do we want it. Gender, social clause, SMEs, all those issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very sorry. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating and for bearing with us with our technical challenges. I'm sure everyone has burning questions, but we've gone quite a bit into lunch, which is in 28 minutes. I can take 2 questions, exactly 2 questions from people who haven't spoken, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Liya. I'm really sorry. So that's 1 question. Any other questions? 2. Okay, thank you.
Very quick. Like, oh, I can't say that. Sorry, it's very quick. Unfortunately, in the room preference. Thembekile, thank you so much for your presentations. Very interesting for me to hear from a negotiator that's actually working at that level and trying to structure at that level. It's completely scary. It sounds really intimidating. But anyway, sorry. What is the difference between a plurilateral and a multilateral agreement? Why is that difference there? Is the World Trade Organization, why did you choose that organization to focus your study on? What are the possible benefits? Sorry.
Okay, the difference between multilateral and plurilateral, you know, for an institution to have a multilateral agreement like the WTO, all members of the WTO should agree by consensus, all of us, to say we are negotiating agreement, we adopt it, we implement it, we monitor it. But if it's a plurilateral, it will be like members who come together, not the whole membership, to say we want to have this agreement. For instance, the government procurement agreement of the WTO. It's not all members of the WTO who have that government procurement agreement, but they take it to the membership and they say, we want to have this amongst ourselves. The whole membership will say, yes, you can. Their agreement is called a plurilateral agreement. So why WTO? WTO is the basis. So all trade agreements have been negotiated at the WTO, serve as basis for the agreements we negotiate bilaterally, like with the AFCFTA or with the EU. We take the WTO agreement as the basis, and then we work from there. Either we give each other much more than we have given all the other members at the WTO, but the WTO is the basis.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm very sorry for the delays once again. We still have about 30 minutes for lunch. I hope you've enjoyed the session and enjoy the next ones. Thank you very much.